good afternoon, and welcome to another Spotlight Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. I'm Christopher Baxter, the Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Spotlight PA. I'm so glad everyone has joined us here today. We've been really excited about hosting this event ever since the maps came out, and here we are, so we can't wait to get going with this discussion. But first, I wanted to give a little background. 1 year ago, we at Spotlight PA made a decision that no other newsroom in the state made, and few others in the country, to dedicate a reporting position to the issue of redistricting. Since then, Spotlight PA's reporting has covered every aspect of the process, why it matters, and what hangs in the balance. We've held public service and educational events like today's programming. We've kept readers up to date on breaking developments with redistricting alerts. We've broken down the maps and helped people understand where they lean and how they score. And most recently, we developed a fantastic online tool that allows residents to type in their address and see how their district will change, including the demographic differences under the current proposals. It's this kind of deep commitment to an issue that can really move the needle. And our commitment to redistricting coverage is indicative of our overall commitment to continue to inform, equip, and empower residents of Pennsylvania to participate in our democracy and make it stronger. This year, more than any other year, we've seen historic public awareness of and engagement in the redistricting process, and that really makes a difference. And so, if you agree with all of this and have valued Spotlight PA's work on redistricting, I have an important request today. We need just 15 people to step forward and make a contribution to Spotlight PA so we can break even on this event and continue this vital coverage. So I'd like to pause here a moment and ask everyone who has the means to please make a gift now at spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, the address is spotlightpa.org/donate. Your contributions help us keep this programming free and available to all. We use the honor system. If you're here today and you value this work and you can afford to help support it, we need your help to keep it going. So again, as we introduce today's event, please take a moment and give now at spotlightpa.org/donate. If you're already a member, and I know we have many members here today, I want to say thank you, big thank you. You've helped make all of this work, all of our redistricting work, and all of our other work possible, and we can't do it without you. That's not just a line we say, it's not just a slogan we go by, it is the truth. We are member supported, community informed, and community supported. And so without you, Spotlight PA simply doesn't exist. Thank you all again. A few last housekeeping items you've probably already seen, but just in case, we are recording today's event so we can share it with those who haven't or couldn't make it. Thank you to all who have set questions in advance. I know we've had a lot of them. We will get to as many of those as possible. And if you have not yet asked a question, you can use the Q&A feature right here in Zoom. To do so, simply click the Q&A icon in the bottom toolbar, and you can type in your question. And again, we'll get to as many of those as possible. Now, I'm excited to introduce Spotlight PA's redistricting reporter, Kate Huang Pu, who will be moderating this afternoon and who will introduce our esteemed panel of experts. Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to discuss what these legislative reapportionment commission maps mean for politics in Pennsylvania. So first, I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists. We have Carol Kuhnelholm, co-founder and chair of Fair Districts PA, a nonpartisan grassroots redistricting reform group in Pennsylvania that advocates for structural change in the redistricting process. We have Victor Martinez, who owns multiple radio stations in Pennsylvania. He's been one of the most enthusiastic advocates for Hispanic representation during this redistricting cycle, and he's worked in his community to increase participation and representation in the local state government, local and state government. And finally, we have Justin Villery. Justin leads Draw the Lines PA, which is a project by the Committee of 70, a good government group. Draw the Lines aims to engage people in the redistricting process by giving them tools to create their own maps and advocating for a transparent redistricting process. So we're very lucky to have them here to chat with us today. So thank you three for being here. So to begin, I'm going to go through a brief overview of the LRC maps that were released a few weeks ago. I'll share my screen so we can see them while we go over them. Here we go. Okay, great. So To begin, we have the LRC Senate maps. This is the less controversial of the two, shall we say. So it fulfills the four base criteria set by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in the 2018 League of Women Voters Act that ended up redrawing our congressional district, but it's compact, which means that basically there's no tentacles or weird protrusions that would result in one part of the district being separate from, or extremely separate from the other parts of the district. It's contiguous, which means there's no isolated areas of a district that are geographically separate from the rest of the district. They all have equal population size or roundabouts, and they all fulfill the need for minimal county splits. This is also codified in our state constitution. There's some discussion about whether or not incumbency played a role in this map, but overall there's been a general acceptance of this map by the legislation. And next we have the House maps. So this is definitely the more controversial of the two. This map passed by party lines, with the Democrats voting for and the Republicans on the panel voting against, and the deciding vote was cast by Chair Mark Nordenberg. So this map kind of reflects general population shifts from east to west, from more rural areas to more suburban and urban areas. So particularly in the northeast and southeast area of Pennsylvania, you can see areas like in Chester County, Delaware County, York. There's been significant population growth there. There's also been part of the controversy is because of the shift in power that this map creates. It favors Democrats more than the current map does, which has resulted in a decent amount of pushback from the Republican members of the legislation. So let me stop sharing my screen. Great. This actually leads nicely into my first question for Justin. So Justin, in reality, has there been an overall shift of power in the new maps? And especially does the shift, if there's one, reflect the demographic changes that have happened? If you want to start with the House map, that would be great.
Sure, yeah, and thank you very much, Kate and Chris, for having all of us. Really appreciate it. I think there is, we have to be careful with how we word this. And of course, it's a preliminary map, so a lot of things could change. The map still largely favors Republicans. If you look at some of the basic partisan bias scores, and it's easy to do this. Anybody can do this on Dave's redistricting app or any of the other publicly available platforms that are there. It just kind of unwinds some of the previous gerrymanders of 2011, the 2012 map. The Philadelphia Inquirer did an analysis that showed that House Republicans would still likely win a majority just in a base year. You know, there's lots of different things that could happen. And this is because, you know, there are just geographic realities in Pennsylvania. I think it's, we have to be careful with how we term, you know, this is not a map that favors Democrats on a, without any sort of context around it. Senate map, it's a little more ambiguous, I think. The Inquirer did a similar analysis as well. And it seems like you mentioned in your intro, there are some incumbency protection that's going on, which I know a number of advocates have some concerns about. That you referred to the House map as controversial, and there's been a lot more talk about it, just because the 3-2 split in the preliminary vote. But I think just if you look at the metrics themselves, the House map is better on pretty much every score than the previous map is. The constitutional scores, the partisan bias scores. And then what Pennsylvanians have largely asked for through draw lines competitions, through all the work that Fair Districts has done in their collection of responses, and then what the Redistricting Reform Commission did in 2019. So,
and I was wondering if you knew a little bit more. You were speaking about how the Republicans would still have a majority in a baseline year. Do you know what that ratio would shift to? Like, I know currently I think it's around 90 Democrats in the House, but how would that sort of balance change?
Right, right. So the Inquirer analysis said 104 to 99. That's just one way you can slice that data. There's a number of ways you can do that. I think the efficiency gap, Carol or Victor might be able to jump in on this. There's one, there's a lot of different scores. The efficiency gap is about, plus 2 or 3% in favor of Republicans, just based off of geography. So it's hard to just pick one, but ultimately it's a more balanced map than it has been previously. I saw somebody threw a question out there about competitiveness. Competitiveness is an entirely different discussion around fairness, and so I think that's important for us to keep in mind too. So,
thank you. And that kind of actually leads into my next question, which is, I think for Carol, how do you think then some of these shifts in power will sort of express themselves in the state assembly? Like which regions are going to be highlighted, or other voices are going to gain or lose power after these changes in the preliminary map?
Well, I would say we don't really know how this will play out because elections should matter and how people vote should matter. For the past decade, really almost the last 20 years, there has been a partisan advantage baked into both the House and the Senate. The House in the late 2008, 2009, the demographics shifted enough that the Democrats got into power for just a couple of years, and then the new maps were drawn and the Republicans have locked in power for the last decade. If the current House map is passed as it is, or similar to what it is, it will make a much more, districts themselves are not competitive, but the balance of power in the House becomes much more elastic or much more responsive to how voters move. So if we have a blue wave election, blue could actually win the House. If it's a red wave election, red could actually win the House, which should change the tone. I mean, right now we've got people who just feel like we're in charge, we control it, we don't have to listen to you ever. So we've actually seen, the House leaders kind of bragging that there has not been a single Democratic bill considered or given a vote in this session. That has to change if the balance of power in the House changes. You asked Justin about the shift in the Senate. The legislators on the whole in the Senate are happier with the Senate map than the legislators in the House, but that's in large part because it does leave them very much in their same safe districts, but it also leaves the status quo of power in the Senate. In other words, the Senate continues to be primarily pretty substantially skewed toward Republicans, and it would be incredibly difficult, almost impossible for the Senate Democrats to win a majority if that proposed map moves forward, which it is still substantially skewed towards Republicans. And so will anything get done? Well, then you have, the House and the Senate, not working on the same page, not super helpful. So I think the Senate map needs significant improvement to be more responsive to voters. And if that were to happen, then we might actually see a legislature that listens to voters and accomplishes the policy changes voters ask. I mean, there's lots of things that voters have been asking for years and have never been, those things are not even given a vote. And if we had a legislature that the maps were drawn genuinely fairly, the legislature would actually accomplish some of the things that the people of Pennsylvania would like, and that would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually sort of relates to what we're trying to see which districts or regions in particular you think have their voice stymied by gerrymandering. So are there any specific districts or areas that you think you see are more egregiously gerrymandered?
So I would say for the House map did a really nice job of trying to expand minority representation. They added some majority minority districts and kind of were pretty careful about not diluting the vote of specific communities. I think there's still some work to be done because I think some things were under the radar. And I think it's really important for voters in those communities to say, hey, you missed us. There's a substantial Korean community in the Horsham area that is chopped in pieces. That voice needs to be heard. There's voices in other parts of the state, even in the House map, but by and large, the House map would give more space to minority members and would kind of even representation across the state. The Senate map does nothing to advance minority representation. And also what we've noticed is the population shift, which across the state, the kind of northwest, north central has lost population. That population, it's not as if those people necessarily moved to Philly, but the Southeast PA, Lehigh Valley, some other counties in the kind of the southeast quadrant of the state have grown substantially, pretty much driven by minority population, and the population deviations in the districts as they're drawn doesn't reflect that. So there's still the districts in the southwest corner of the state are substantially underpopulation. The districts in the southeast corner of the state are substantially overpopulation. So the vote of the southeast corner of the state is being diluted. The vote of the southwest corner is being amplified. Those things need to be addressed in that Senate map.
Victor, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because I think Carol just mentioned some of the areas you're most familiar with. So yeah, if you'd like to comment, that'd be great.
Well, to pick up on what was just said on a minority district and so on and so forth, and that's when I come into play. I completely disagree that these maps have done nothing to help minorities, because I joke around, they invited us to the party, but they didn't give us the address. Why? Because yes, you take a district and you make it 40% minority, right? But the reality is that none of those minority actually have a shot of getting someone elected. So if you take a district that is 20% Latino, 8%, 10% African-American, and so on and so forth, none of those minority will actually have a shot of getting someone elected. So for me, that's not representation. That doesn't give us a chance. That doesn't give us an opportunity. From my point of view, I'm obviously representing the Hispanic, the Latino vote. Latinos represent 46% of the growth of the state. If you look at the last census, it was the Latinos, the one that provided the growth of the state. African Americans was a lot lower, and Anglo whites were negative. And from looking at the map, and I've had a lot of discussions with leaders in the Latino community from Philadelphia to Reading to Lancaster to the Lehigh Valley, in every single district, Latinos were lost percentage. So for example, you have district, Manny Guzman district, sorry about that. We have Manny Guzman's district, which is 127. That district lost 13% of Latino percentage, 13% of Latino population. If you look at the new District 22, lost 5% of Latino population. If you look at 180, which is Angels Cruz district, that one is being split in two. So the Hispanic, the Latino community has worked has grown and has worked very hard to accomplish to get there, to where we have a possibility of getting representation, and now we're losing that. And not only are we not getting a shot of electing representatives, but we now have an opportunity of losing the ones that we have. So in a bad day, cold day, snowy day, lower turnout, now Manny Guzman can lose his seat. Same thing with Angel Cruz. So out of 253 legislators, we only have 3 Latinos, not one senator. We don't have a shot of getting a Latino senator. And we now have a possibility in a bad election day to lose the 2 out of the 3 that we have.
I think before I want to go back to something about the Senate maps where we go a little bit deeper on representation, because we have an audience question about from Joe S. about the extent to which the new districts were created without regard for with regard for keeping the legislators in the new districts. So about incumbency, he wants to know if the maps were drawn ignoring the residency of current legislators, with the possibility that some legislators would no longer meet the residency requirement. I think this is a great question. You know, there's a lot of history with Pennsylvania redistricting and incumbency. So Justin, I would love to hear about how both the Senate and House maps do on this front.
Seems like on the Senate map, this was a value, and you'll recall that there was a unanimous vote. And we don't know what conversations were had behind the scenes, but there was only one group of senators that were bumped together in a district in the Senate side, Senator Baker and Senator Udicek in the Northeast. And so it's largely viewed as a very friendly map on the Senate side to incumbents. On the House side, there are, Carol or Victor, correct me, there are 7 Republican pairings and 1 Democratic pairing that's together.
I believe it's 7 and 2, 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
I think it might be 7 Republicans, 1 Democratic pairing, and 4 R&D pairings.
For R&D, right.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. And so the Republican or the House map seems to have been less friendly to that. I know the Senate map has, or the Senate just itself, the way it, elects people every 4 years instead of 2, creates an added challenge for that, I imagine, just in terms of who would be up for re-election by bunking senators together. But I think on that, and Chairman Nordenberg said this too, in his opening remarks when they released the preliminary maps, that they did try to create a number of open seats that would become opportunity districts for people of color. I think there were 7 seats, which is, I think it seems like that's a pretty worthy goal. And so I think that was the result of that is bunking some incumbents together. So I know a number of Republicans are very concerned about the sheer number of Republicans that are bunked together versus Democrats. So.
Yeah, that was definitely a topic of conversation, I think, at the hearings and at the various hearings. But
Right.
So Victor, going back, you've been passionately advocating for increased representation in the Hispanic community, and particularly in the Lehigh area where you reside, where the Hispanic community is a significant percentage of the population. So I'd like to start with, what made you want to get involved? What were your first steps, especially for people listening who are want to get involved? What was your process like?
Well, for me, it was representation, having a voice, having us at the table. And so when I realized that, again, as I said before, we have 253 legislators, but there's only 3 Latinos in the House side and none in the Senate. We are not at the table. And then I will repeat myself, when you look at the growth of the state and when you look at the explosion of the Latino population in the state of Pennsylvania, I mean, we have 1.5 million Latinos. And so where are we being represented? And so that's what got me involved into wanting to make sure that Latinos in the areas where we're growing, Lehigh Valley, Allentown, Bethlehem, the 22 corridor, Reading, Philadelphia. A lot of people may not know this, but Latinos are 55% of the population in Allentown. Latinos are 69% of the population in Reading. We are 30% in Bethlehem. We're 20% in Easton. We're 15% in Philadelphia. So, my strong belief on having our community being represented. And 3, it's not enough. And I believe. And so then I look at these maps and I see, like I said before, where every district, the percentage of Latinos in those districts actually went down, then obviously that's of concern. And yes, they claim to make this district an opportunity for minorities and so on and so forth. But I will repeat myself. The problem is that not one minority actually have a shot of getting elected because the numbers are too low. As a whole, as a group, yeah, we may be 40%, but when you take and you divide those groups and you put Latinos on one side, African Americans, we have a Syrian community here in the Lehigh Valley, then the reality is that none of those minorities actually have an opportunity. I was talking to someone yesterday and I brought up the point. So I can go and try to recruit a very qualified Latino candidate, maybe a business owner, somebody that can, run and represent. And we have talked to quite a few of them. And they come back to me and say, wait, why? I need to, sacrifice my family, sacrifice my business, invest money, and I don't have a shot. And there's also a little bit of funny math here, because a lot of times you will say, well, that district has a 30% Latino population, and that sounds good. But when you actually look at the percentage of registered voters, then that number drops. Now, all of a sudden, it's not 30% anymore. It goes down to like 26%. So that's what got me involved, and that's what I'm advocating. Look at these maps, take in consideration the growth of the state, the communities, and give minorities a real opportunity to have a shot. Don't get me wrong, we still have to do the work. We still have to go out and vote. We still have to get involved. Yes, and my community has a lot of work to do. That we have to be honest. But even if we do the work now, we still don't have a shot of actually getting someone elected, and that's my problem.
And you spoke a little bit about how you feel about the LRC maps, but I was wondering specifically in the Lehigh area as well, because that's where you're based in, how you think the maps did in that region.
They're not good. We created a new district, 134, that basically came out of this District 22. It dropped the percentage of Latinos in District 22. And so, again, you divided the Latino community. We had a candidate who had no name recognition, no money, never been involved in politics, and she came within 55 votes of beating the incumbent. And so now, because she came so close, now she does have a little bit of name recognition, and so she announced that she's running for District 22, only to find out that she no longer lives in District 22. So now she can't run. She can't run for the District 22 that she came so close of winning. And this is on the Democratic side. This is the Peter Swire seat, and the other one was Ines Santiago. So again, someone with no name recognition, no money, no politics, decided to run, came within 55 votes of beating the incumbent. And so now we're getting ready to, hopefully this time around, cross the finish line to get representation, and the line got moved, and now she don't even longer live in the district. So it's a problem. And then in the Senate map, same thing. They created this new Senate map. The current Senator Pat Brown is safe because they created a Senate district which is Republican, and so now he's safe. They divided the city of Allentown, where the current senator, the Republican senator, gets to keep his seat and keep the Republican side of the city. So the city now is cut in half. And in this new created Senate seat, yes, again, it's minority friendly and more minority open seat available, try to go get it. But really, minorities don't have a chance to actually run someone that can win.
Right. And now I want to pivot a bit and talk about how maps are made, especially as a point of comparison to the LRC maps, because we have both Carol and Justin here who head organizations that created their own maps. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that process and what kind of criteria you use, how long it took, and what you think the biggest differences between your maps and the LRC maps are, especially highlighting, why the timeline was different, significant changes in whichever regions. Carol, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, so we did a Fair Districts PA People's Maps, and what we did was we held a mapping competition this summer. We chose the 5 top maps, and we had lots of conversation about how do you decide what are the top 5 maps. But judging by the kind of constitutional criteria and the criteria embedded in legal precedent, we were looking for maps that were compact, split as few municipalities and counties as possible, address partisan bias to bring it to as low a level as possible, and maximize minority representation. And as Victor has mentioned, there's lots of big questions about how do you maximize minority representation, because if you create safer districts for minority representatives, you can't add extra districts. If you want to add extra districts, sometimes the ones you have become less safe. So you're kind of balancing those, and that was a lot of discussion. But we chose the top maps, and then we kind of looked at the best features of those to begin with a composite map, and then we spent weeks inviting community input, saying, so folks in Allentown, which of these would be best for the Latino community in Allentown, for anybody in Allentown, and got lots of feedback around the state. And that's how we created our people's maps. It was time consuming. It was really interesting, but we learned a ton about Pennsylvania geography, groups around the state. And fortunately, we have volunteers all over the state who were able to give us that feedback. And that's pretty different than the LRC process. They invited comment, then they drew their maps, then they passed them. And now they've got this window of time where people can offer feedback, but it's not the same as having a meeting where you say, hey, does this work better or does this work better? Hey, you have this, the proposed district, Senate District 14 in Allentown, does this work better? Or let's look at a couple other options, which is what we were able to do. Look at a variety of options, look at the metrics on those options, talk about the pros and cons, because any district you draw is going to have some benefits, it's going to have some disadvantages. So it was valuable for us to have those conversations, and the LRC, as it's constructed, doesn't really leave the option for that to take place. But you asked how our maps compare. I was really impressed that the House map actually on a number of metrics is better than our people's map. And I think is in some areas lacking that community input. And I think the comments can make the small changes that would make a really good map. I think the House map is a good map. I think it could be even better if it gets the community input it needs and makes some changes. The Senate map does not seem to reflect any of the testimony that was submitted. It does not meet the metrics of our Senate map. I think it has a long way to go to be a good map. I'm hoping that they do the work to make that happen, but it certainly needs some work to be more reflective of the population shifts, the growth in minority communities, and what people want in a Senate map.
All right, and Justin, how about you?
Yeah, so we did the congressional map. Our Draw the Line Citizens map is purely congressional. So I'm deferring to Carol for a large part of this conversation around the legislative maps, because she was the one. I will fully give Carol all the credit in the world. We had to draw 17 districts. Carol and her team had to draw 50 and 203. So it's a much different animal. We really focused, we've been running competitions around our congressional and legislative maps for the last 3 years now. And so we collected over 1,500 congressional maps, and we developed a statistical profile of those. What was the average compactness score? What were the split scores that we had? And then partisan fairness, competitiveness, all that. And then we also looked at the regionality that shown through on those maps. What were the regional trends that people wanted to see in their map? Like we learned you don't split the Lehigh Valley, Northampton and Lehigh. We learned that there are Bucks County wants to stay together, right? There's all sorts of different ways in which people draw their maps, but there are some things that rise to the top. And then we produced our citizens map, and we've been sharing it with the General Assembly to try to encourage them to use that as a starting point for their map. I know this is a legislative discussion. The congressional is a whole different animal. Yeah, that's kind of how we went about it. But it's and just like the people's maps from fair districts, these are people created maps. They're not created by politicians. They're not created by the courts. These are maps that represent the goals of Pennsylvania's voters. And these maps should be owned by the voters. They shouldn't be owned by the politicians. So
I always think it's really interesting to hear what criteria different organizations value and how that compares to what the LRC is doing.
Mhm.
I want to remind people that we're getting to the end of the panel section, so soon we're going to be doing Q&A from the audience. So remember to submit your question. But the next question I have for you guys actually has to do with the redistricting process and transparency and public outreach. A lot of the audience members also asked about this, and one of the questions from John P was, why doesn't PA use an independent commission? That's definitely been something that's frequently discussed. The redistricting reform movement as a whole. Victor, would you like to give your thoughts on independent commission versus LRC, how you think that would go?
Because at the end of the day, this is politics, right? So an independent commission, may have a lot of conflicts with the interests of the politicians and the parties. So they're not going to delegate that to someone else. They want to protect themselves. That's the reality. They want to protect their members. They want to protect their power. And so I was in a conversation yesterday where someone said, hey, Republicans know that they are going to keep the Senate, as Carol said earlier. And so the Democrats are doing everything they can to try to get the House. And so when you have that in the game, that's when, they're not going to have anybody from the outside come in and get in the way of that.
And then as a second part to that question, John also asked, why is redistricting reform not on the ballot in PA? And Carol, I know Fair District has had a lot to do with the Laffer bill, so I was wondering if you'd like to speak to this.
Yeah, so Pennsylvania does not have a citizen initiative. We're one of, quite a few states do. So in quite a few states, if citizens say, we want to accomplish this reform, the legislation is not interested, they just draft what it would be, and they collect petition signatures. So we started Fair Districts PA in January 2016. So we're 6 years old this month. And the following November, there was a group in Michigan, a young woman in Michigan said on Facebook, would anybody like to help end gerrymandering in Michigan? And soon had a lot of volunteers, turned into something called Voters Not Politicians. They collected over 400,000 petition signatures. And on the ballot in 2018, they had a referendum to create an independent commission. So a year from 2017 to 2018, it took them a year to get that passed. In Pennsylvania, to get something like that passed, we have to get the legislature to pass it in one session and then pass it in the next session, and then it goes to referendum. And we've been trying, but the legislative leaders, as Victor said, they control everything by controlling the redistricting process. Those 4 legislative leaders who are on the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, they can keep their colleagues in line by saying, I'm gonna give you a bad district, or I'm gonna give you a good district. Or what do you want for your district? And so they can control their caucuses and keep their caucuses loyal to them by the mapping process. They're not gonna move a bill that threatens that level of power. So we have not been able to accomplish the reform that we like, but if we could get a legislature, if we could get good maps this time, if we could get a legislature that actually was responding to the people of Pennsylvania instead of playing the power games, maybe that would change. We could only hope. But right now, there's no path to victory right now with the current legislature.
And Justin, what has your experience been with the redistricting reform movement?
I think Carol's been front and center on this. And so just like she and Victor said, there's a challenge with Pennsylvania, just the way that our system is set up without initiative and referenda to put in an independent citizens commission. And so we adopted not a competing, but just kind of a parallel track. That the more people that would be involved in drawing these maps themselves, the more that you could create a process that Pennsylvanians trusted, where they could participate and share their maps, share the way that they wanted PA to be drawn. I think we've seen an explosion of interest in this issue, and a lot of that is largely because of the work that advocate organizations across the Commonwealth have done since 2015, 2016, 2017, as we ramp up into the redistricting process in 2021. Carol, you have like 70,000 people on your email list. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. It's an extraordinary amount. Like, people are paying attention in a way that they never have before. And so sometimes it's helpful, even if we don't have an independent commission right now, it's helpful to think about the long game. Like, all right, we're continuing to make improvements. And even if we don't see it in 2021, maybe there's opportunities down the road where we can finally get the process that Pennsylvanians deserve. So it doesn't assuage concerns now, but democracy is it's a big ship, and you have to slowly move it, right?
For sure. So just to wrap up, I'd like to go down the line and ask each of you, just how Pennsylvanians can get involved in the redistricting process and make sure their voice is heard. Victor, would you like to start?
How can you get involved? Vote. Vote. That's how you can get involved. Make sure you're involved. Make sure that you participate. Again, I have testified now twice. and I'm just a radio guy. I've never been involved in politics. Actually, people will push me away. Oh, don't do it. Don't get involved in politics, because some side of your audience will get upset and versus the other, and you're supposed to make sure that everybody likes you. And I decided no. I decided I'm going to get involved. And so that's it. Just get involved, participate, engage your community, register to vote, and actually vote.
And how about you, Justin?
I just dropped in the chat, and I know Yasmin did as well, the link for how people can leave their comments on the State House and State Senate maps. They're called exceptions on the site. That doesn't mean you take an exception to it. You can file positive comments as well as negative. So really look at you can see the maps as well on those sites. They've got them set up in I think, a fairly user-friendly manner where you can evaluate those maps and look at how your community is impacted. Look at the statewide scores too. This is a zoomed in, but also a big picture analysis as well. So yeah, go on the redistricting.state.pa.us.
And you do have, let me just say, you have until January 18th is the deadline. So you have really not very much time left to offer comment. January 18th is the deadline. And then they will take those comments and make final changes and vote on a final map. So the time to make comment is not very long, but then democracy is not a one-time thing. Democracy takes a lot of work, and I should mention that Fair Districts PA is a fiscal project of the League of Women Voters. They're having a panel at 2 today, talking about the various jobs that are needed to keep democracy strong and to strengthen democracy here in Pennsylvania. And I would say, so offer comment right away, but then join one of the groups, Committee of 70, Fair Districts PA, League of Women Voters, one of the nonpartisan groups that are paying attention and will alert you when there are things that need attention, because there's a lot going on, and citizens need to weigh in a nonpartisan way to say, this is not about one party winning. This is about keeping the process fair and strong so that our voices are heard. Because if either party gets too much control, we as voters lose. We lose any ability to impact what happens. And we need to keep both parties accountable. Right now, with 20 years of having the legislature under their control, that's made it very hard to keep the legislature accountable. And so there's a lot of work to do. And as Victor said, once we get past this season, if there are new maps in place, which we believe there will be, that means there's some opportunity for new candidates. That means there's some opportunity to push old candidates who have not paid attention well. That means we need to be registering voters a lot all over the state, and we need to really be encouraging people to turn out and vote, because we do have a chance to change the whole composition, the whole tone of our state legislature. This is the year to do it, and it's going to take a lot of work by a lot of people.
Great. All right. Thank you, guys. So now we're just going to get to some audience questions. I have a bunch lined up here. So one is from Diana. I'm curious about the difference between fairness and competitiveness. So is fairness the integrity of the map, and competitiveness the response of the voters to a particular election? Or if you guys could just talk a little bit about those criteria, that would be great.
Well, Justin, do you want to jump into that one?
And correct me if I get anything confused. So competitiveness, I think that's actually a pretty decent summary what the questioner gave. Competitiveness generally looks at a particular seat, the idea that you want to have a competitive district so that both parties' voters can have a say in the outcome. And then if you zoom out, the fairness of a map is that maybe you could say both parties have a chance at the majority to be in leadership. And so, you could have 203 competitive seats. That would create a challenge to the other constitutional requirements like compactness, contiguity, equal population, limiting splits. Conversely, you could have 203 elections in which each candidate wins by 70 or 80 points. I don't think anybody wants that. So you have to find a balance there that's in play between those two values.
And I would say, so Pennsylvania, somebody asked some questions about the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, gave the House map an F on competitiveness. And they have algorithms that do all kinds of stuff. And one of the challenges in Pennsylvania is we have 203 House districts, so they're quite small. And Pennsylvania is demographically pretty sorted. In other words, people in the cities tend to be pretty heavily Democratic. The rural areas are not quite so monolithic. People think, oh, they're all Republicans, but if you look at the demographics, it's more like 70-30. It depends on where you are, but it makes it very difficult. There are purple areas, so it's possible to have competitive districts in those areas, but big chunks of the state, it's really not possible to draw competitive districts unless you do kind of weird spaghetti shaped districts. So to give Pennsylvania an F on competitiveness is kind of doesn't recognize the demographics and the geography and the number of districts that we have. Our other complaint about that score is that competitiveness is not a legal requirement. So it's not one of those, it's nice if we have competitive districts, and every one of us would love to live in a district where we know our voices are, we're going to have the deciding vote. That would be great. But the truth is, we don't live there. I actually do. I live in a pretty competitive area, but most of us don't. And so that can't be, that should not be one of our top requirements. But as Justin said, a responsive map, a map that does change when many voters vote one way, that ought to be reflected in what the legislature looks like. And right now, that's not the case.
Okay, and we have another question. Which state or states have what you think is the best process for voting map drawings for redistricting? What are the characteristics at the state level that represent best practices in map drawing? And this is from William. So if we could all just go down the line and say, what are some characteristics that you would like to see? If there are comparable practices in other states, that would be great. Victor, would you like to start?
I have no idea how other state work, so I wouldn't even go into that one. So I'll let someone else pick that one.
Well, I'll jump in. I've done road tripping around the state with county with commissioners from the 2011 Independent Commission in California. California was the first state to try a citizens commission. They did it in 2011, and then they won an award and got some funding to visit other states to try to explain what they did. And it sounds wonderful. They had a commission of I believe 13 commissioners from both parties and independent, unaffiliated, or third-party voters. And what they did was they held regional meetings. So they would have a regional meeting with a mapper right there, and they would talk about, how do you see your community? What would a good map look like for you? And then they would actually show what that might look like. As I was describing what we tried to do with our people's map, we were trying to approximate that to say, okay, we're gonna have we call them community mapping conversations. We're gonna have a community mapping conversation with folks in Lancaster, and let's look at, how we would map Lancaster and see, when people would say, oh, that doesn't make any sense. And then they'd look more and they'd say, oh, but if we did it that way, we could maximize representation for more people instead of, make some more competitive districts so that everybody in those districts actually gets heard. Wouldn't that be interesting? So to show the trade-offs and let people think about the trade-offs instead of just saying, well, it's always been mapped this way, that's the way it is. The goal was to show the trade-offs and get the community itself to say, this makes more sense to us. And California did that way. Michigan just finished, as I said, Michigan passed their independent commission. They just passed their bills a couple of weeks ago, their maps. And they did something similar, but they had several different maps going, and then they had ranked choice voting at the end for those maps. So it's really interesting. I haven't had time to dig in deeply on how their process worked, but there are certainly some really good ideas out there, and we want to explore them more once we get past this current mapping drama that we're in.
And Justin, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, Carol hit it with California and Michigan. Colorado does an independent commission. This is the first, besides California, and I think Arizona has been doing this for a couple cycles as well, but besides those two, this is the first time that a number of states have tried something. Colorado just finished theirs as well. Ohio has a very funky one. It's still partisan driven or driven by elected officials, but because they didn't come to an agreement, I think they have to redo it again in 4 years. So they've got a weird setup, but I think everybody kind of recognizes California is the gold standard. I think Colorado, people are excited about. Michigan, people are excited about the process in that as well. So.
And as a follow-up just from myself, I would love to hear about what you guys think about the constitutional amendment that Representative Grove is going to introduce on Monday. that's forming its own sort of commission. I believe it's 11 people. None of them can have ever held elected office, and it also sets up these other sort of procedural rules for using the current map if another map doesn't pass in time. I'd love to just, if you guys can describe that a little bit and talk a little bit about how you think that would affect Pennsylvania redistricting, that'd be great.
Well, it's brand new, so it's hard to have a lot of in-depth analysis because it's just kind of hit us. But it looks to me like an attempt to hold on to power. It looks to me like an attempt to, number one, delay this mapping process. Number two, allow legislators to be the ones who choose commissioners. And if the commission can't agree on a map within a very tight timeline, then it goes back to the legislature to decide the final map. So to me, it looks very much like a last gasp, like, are you taking power away from us? We're not going to let you do that. Attempt to push back on I do believe that the maps that come out of the Legislative Reapportionment Commission this time will be far more fair. They will level the playing field, and I think there's a lot of angst about that. And I think this amendment is one attempt to bypass that possibility and hold on to power into the next decade. And let me say, I know that there's been a little conversation going on in the chat about, that those who are trying to balance the partisan bias are obviously attempting a democratic gerrymander. Justin was very careful in his wording earlier. There is nothing in these maps that in any way suggests democratic gerrymander. These maps still have a slight lean towards Republicans. They are attempts to balance out what has been pretty extreme gerrymandering in the state, to bring it back to a much more even level. And that is a power shift. If somebody, the way I look at it is if somebody has been standing on your head and somebody pulls them off your head and you stand up, there's a power shift going on there, but it's a very appropriate power shift. And to me, that's what's happening here. We need a power shift. It's appropriate power shift. It's not a gerrymander. It's a simple, let's restore something that seems more equitable and more fair.
And I will add on that that is very important what Carol just say, because there's nothing, I joke around and I said, there's nothing more dangerous than a politician that feels that he's safe. If he's safe, he is accountable to no one. And the same thing goes with both political parties, and that's a problem that we have, that, politicians they feel safe. They're not worried about losing their elections. So then nothing gets done. In politics, we talk a lot about nothing gets done. Nothing gets done in Washington. Nothing gets done in Harrisburg. Nothing gets done in city council. Well, that's the root of the problem. These politicians are safe. They feel safe. And so they feel they don't have to answer to no one, because they know the next election, they have a D or an R next to their name, they are safe. We have become as a society too much attached to a team, if you will. And so even though you don't like that guy because he's a Democrat or he's a Republican, I'm going to vote for him or her anyway. And so that's exactly what's happening. So no bills get through. There's no communication, there's no negotiation, there's no finding a happy medium. It's either my way or the highway. And that's the problem that we have all the way from Washington, all the way down to city council.
Okay, great. So the next question we have is, what is the likelihood that the state maps will be appealed to the state Supreme Court, and what would they appeal it on? So this is from Julie P.
Well, I would say it seems very clear to me that Chairman Nordenberg, he is a law professor, was in charge of the law school at Pitt. He takes the law incredibly seriously. He hired a legal advisor for the commission team, even though he himself is a lawyer, and they have had testimony from voting rights experts. And I believe that they are planning to have a hearing next Friday with experts to explain the maps. And they will have a voting rights expert explaining what they've done on behalf of voting rights next Friday. I don't know the time yet, but I've heard that that's happening. I am quite sure that they are drawing these maps to be as litigation proof as a map can be. And I think he has laid that out very clearly from the start. You know, these are the legal requirements. This is what we are doing. And in fact, I've been really pleased. Our bill, we had our independent commission bill, but then we had a bill called LACR, the Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act, where we tried to clarify what would be appropriate guardrails for the redistricting process. From what I can tell, they've actually been following all those guardrails, all the things that we put in place. It looks like they have been very carefully saying, what would anybody litigate? And we are going to, we're going to make sure that we've covered that. That doesn't mean that people won't litigate. They will litigate. We know that. But it looks like he's worked very hard to make sure that if they do litigate and it goes to the court will dismiss it quickly. That's what it looks like to me.
And let's not forget that they learned their lesson from the last time around when, they couldn't come into agreement and he went into the courts and he went into the Supreme Court. So I think that based on that, that's why, like Carol say, they're trying to cross the T's and dot the I's, because again, we already been through this dance before.
Justin, do you have anything to add?
I don't, no, I think
Yeah.
Victor and Carol nailed it. Yep.
No, it's all good. All right, so I'll wrap this up with a final question. This is from John F. How can individuals put pressure on legislators to improve our system? They're saying emails, or is there any other specific approaches that they can?
Vote. That's the power. That's the key. Vote. I have a thing that I explain to my audience, and every time I get a chance, I tell people all the time. If you take the poorest zip code of any state, any city, the poorest, and you put in top of that map another map, it's no coincidence that the poorest neighborhood, the poorest city has the lowest turnout of voting. And so I tell my audience and the community, if you want change, you have to vote. It's no coincidence that when a grant shows up or a check shows up, the politicians look within his district where the higher voter turnout is, so he can go there and tell those people, hey, you, look, I'm bringing you money, I'm fixing your roads, I'm, doing this and doing that. So there is no coincidence that the poorest zip code, the poorest city, the poorest neighborhood has the lowest turnout. So if we want to change that around, I'm talking to the Latino community. Unfortunately, we have a lot of those poor neighborhoods. And I tell my people all the time, if you want change, if you want better schools, if you want better roads, if you want more police, if you want more attention from your politicians, vote.
That's great. I mean, any other tips and tricks you guys have? I think voting obviously essential.
Yeah.
But in the interim, are there, what are some things that people can participate in?
Well, I just added a link to our website. I would say if you could join us, there's a little join button. If you haven't joined us, join, because we send emails when there are things that you can do. So if there's legislation that you can support, we give you the email. If there's legislation, we say, oppose this, let your legislator know this is a terrible bill. There's lots and lots of bills. A lot of legislators don't really pay a lot of attention. They just vote the way their leaders tell them to, unless their constituents say, don't vote for this. If you do vote for this, we're going to be really angry, and we're going to get all of our neighbors to so you can't just vote every time there's an election and then ignore the whole process in between. You really need to pay attention to what's going on. You need to get to know who your legislators are. So visit our website, hit the join button and join, but also there's a contact your legislator page that you can find out who are your legislators. Have they supported redistricting reform or have they not? If they haven't, ask them why. And if they're complaining about what's going on now, say, you had a chance to put a better process in place. Why didn't you do that? So it's really important to build a relationship with your legislator and let them know we're paying attention. You can't ignore us, because as Victor said, the ones who make noise are the ones who get attention. And it's important to let them know that you're watching and you need them to be accountable to voters rather than to leaders.
And I'll just co-sign on what Victor and Carol said and then add two more things. If you're going to comment on the State House or State Senate maps, Carol mentioned the deadline, January 18th, and be concise. They want to see specific changes, not just I want fair districts. Like that doesn't really help them that much. And then the last is just a shameless plug for our organization, drawthelinespa.org. And then you can see, I dropped it in the chat there. You can see we've got our citizens map for congressional districts. Go ahead and check that out. Yeah, our contact info is there as well. But yes, get involved, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you three so much for taking the time and participating today. This has been so great. I've loved listening to you guys talk. I'm sure we'll talk more in the future. But yeah, I'll send it back to Chris.
Great, thank you. What a wonderful discussion. We're at the end of our time together this afternoon. And I want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, all of our attendees for a really essential and informative discussion. Central to the mission of Spotlight PA is ensuring Pennsylvanians in all corners of the state, regardless of their financial resources, have access to trusted, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism to be informed, equipped, and empowered in everyday life. So as we always say at the end of our events, this conversation was just the beginning. Regardless of where you stand on the maps or your political affiliation, please take what you learned today, continue to get informed, talk to your elected officials and neighbors, and continue to be engaged in our great state. Today's event was a free public service provided by Spotlight PA. And so this is the time I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution and are able to do so, please go to spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, that address is spotlightpa.org/donate. Contributions of any amount help us keep this programming free for all, and your support goes directly back into our journalism and programming like this. Thank you again to everyone who has supported the event today. Thank you to all of our members. We can't do this without you. Thank you, thank you. And most importantly, have a great end of your week, everyone. Have a great weekend and stay involved. And we hope to see you here soon.